The first name that me and Dime ever came up with for the band was Gemini. Then it elevated from Gemini to Eternity. A guy suggested to me, man, you ought to call your band Pantera. And so we became Pantera from that point on.
Vinnie Paul, a name that needs no introduction in the world of metal. He didn't scream, he didn't stand in the spotlight, but he was the heartbeat that kept the beast called Pantera alive, roaring, and immortal. With his long hair, rebellious cowboy hat, and ever-full black-tooth grin, Vinnie wasn't just a drummer. He was the soul, the backbone of a generation that believed music must be lived with blood, with fire, with absolute loyalty to oneself. From Cowboys from Hell to Vulgar Display of Power, then Far Beyond Driven, every beat he played felt like he was building a fortress out of sound, solid yet wild. But that career, that man, took a devastating turn on a December night in 2004, when his brother, his soulmate, his lifelong bandmate, Dimebag Darrell, was shot dead right in front of him, on stage. From that moment on, Vinnie wasn't Pantera's drummer anymore. He became a survivor, a man carrying not just an unfinished legacy, but a pain too deep for words. He once said, "If it weren't for music, I wouldn't be here." And he stayed, drumming, drinking, laughing, touring. But behind those eyes, there was always an empty seat no one could fill and a soul he never let go of. So the question remains, can a drum beat drown out the echo of a gunshot? And can an artist keep playing until the very moment his heart stops beating? Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the story of a true metal drumming legend. Early life. Before he became a metal icon with feet like steel hammers and a heart that screamed through every beat, Vinnie Paul was just a Texas kid growing up amid the scent of sawdust and the sound of music pouring out from his father's home studio. Born on March 11, 1964 in Abilene, Texas, Vinnie didn't choose music. He breathed it. His father, Jerry Abbott, was a country musician, sound engineer, and producer. A man who didn't just pass down a love for instruments to his sons, but literally built a recording studio in their house. It was there that Vinnie and his younger brother, Darrell Lance Abbott, later known as Dimebag Darrell, began jamming long before they were old enough to legally hold a beer. People often asked, where did Vinnie learn to play drums? The answer, he didn't learn. He lived it. His father initially encouraged him to try brass instruments, but the shimmering tones of horns couldn't contain a boy drawn to heavy sounds, raw instinct, and breakneck speed. Drums called to him like an extension of his own body. No teachers, no formal training. He learned by ear, by feeling, by mimicking the beats of Peter Criss, Kiss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldridge. Drummers he admired not for perfection, but for playing like survival depended on it. From a young age, Vinnie and Darrell were two poles of the same electric current. Darrell obsessed over the guitar, losing himself for hours in wild riffs, while Vinnie stayed behind him, holding down the rhythm like it was their lifeline. They didn't need to talk much, just a glance, and they knew where the next note belonged. As teenagers, they played live shows in dive bars, under dim lights, amid drunken howls and the stink of cheap cigarettes. But to them, it was paradise. In 1981, at just 17, Vinnie co-founded Pantera with his brother. At first, it was a typical glam metal act of the time. Big hair, leather pants, eyeliner, and Van Halen covers. But beneath the flashy surface, Vinnie felt something was missing. He craved drum beats that could split open your chest, sounds that made the floor quake, a playing style that was heavy, raw, and brutally honest. There was no childhood trauma, no dark family history, and maybe that's exactly why, when the storm finally came, it cut deeper than anyone could have imagined. Growing up in a house full of sound and brotherhood, Vinnie Paul was forged not by pain, but by passion. When he finally stepped out of that garage, he wasn't chasing stardom. He was on a mission, to drum until his last breath. Some artists are born to learn music. Vinnie Paul was born to keep time for a storm named rock. His life didn't begin in tragedy, but that only made the wounds that came later all the more impossible to heal. Subscribe to Rock Discovery if you want to journey with us into those fateful moments where the spotlight couldn't hide the pain echoing behind the drum beat. Early career with Pantera. Pantera wasn't born in glory. It was raised on sweat, on long nights in southern bar rooms, on the drum beats of a teenage Texan pounding as if he were trying to smash through every wall in his way. When Vinnie Paul and his younger brother Dimebag Darrell formed the band in 1981, they were just two kids playing music in their dad's garage. No record deals, no promises of fame, just one dream: to play like there was no tomorrow. Pantera started off as a glam metal band, the dominant style of the early 1980s. They wore leather pants, makeup, had big teased hair, and covered Van Halen like hundreds of other groups. At just 17, Vinnie was already a disciplined, hard-working drummer with an organized mind. He didn't just keep time for the band, he handled everything behind the scenes: booking shows, sound production, mixing tracks. If Dimebag was the artistic soul, then Vinnie was the operating brain. But behind the glitter, Vinnie never felt that kind of music was truly his. He craved something more real, heavier, rawer, more primal. Music that made your chest tremble not from the spectacle, but from the sheer force of the bass drum. The turning point came in 1987, when Pantera brought in Phil Anselmo, a wild, ferocious vocalist from New Orleans, to replace their original frontman. It didn't take long for the band to evolve. Glam metal was cast aside. Pantera transformed into what would later be called groove metal, a style that didn't chase thrash's speed or glam's shine, but hit hard, steady, and heavy like a hammer blow. In 1990, Cowboys from Hell was born. It wasn't a debut. It was a declaration of war. Vinnie played like the operator of a massive industrial machine. Every fill was a cannon blast. Dimebag's guitar screamed, Phil's voice tore through the air, but it was Vinnie's concrete foundation that held it all together. By the time Vulgar Display of Power dropped in 1992, Pantera wasn't a regional band anymore. They were a global beast. Walk, This Love, Mouth for War. There was nothing soft, nothing polished. This was music that raged, that pushed back, that felt real. And Vinnie wasn't just drumming, he was commanding. He used silence with precision, struck with deadly timing, building tension like steel wire pulled to its breaking point. No need for speed, just pure weight. In 1994, Pantera made history, Far Beyond Driven, an album with no radio-friendly hits, no commercial compromise, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. In a time when grunge ruled, MTV reigned, and metal was being pushed aside, Pantera roared like an earthquake. And behind that roar was Vinnie, steady, unshakable. But the higher you climb, the harder the wind howls. Cracks began to form behind the scenes. Phil Anselmo, increasingly distant, drowning in addiction, stopped showing up for recordings. He isolated himself, recorded vocals separately, and no longer toured consistently. For Vinnie, who saw the band as family, this felt like betrayal. Pantera wasn't just a band, it was built with blood, but Phil was burning it down. Dimebag Darrell was caught in the middle, his brother on one side, his closest friend on the other. He tried to hold it together to preserve the remnants of a golden era, but the divide was too wide. The Great Southern Trendkill, 1996, and Reinventing the Steel, 2000, were still fierce, heavy albums, but the unity, the original spirit, was gone. Pantera was no longer one. Finally, in 2003, Pantera officially disbanded. No loud announcement, no farewell tour, just doors closing, and cold, expressionless stares. For fans, it was the end of a legendary band, but for Vinnie Paul, it was the collapse of an entire life. Pantera wasn't just a job or just music. It was his bond with Dimebag, his blood, his identity. And he didn't yet know that the real pain was still waiting. On a fateful night when the drums would fall silent, drowned by a single gunshot. Tragedy and rebirth. After Pantera disbanded in a bitter, silent collapse, Vinnie Paul all but vanished from the spotlight. There were no more thunderous drums shaking arenas, no more blazing tours, no more dreams of reaching new heights. He refused interviews, refused to mention Phil Anselmo, and refused to face what he wasn't yet ready to admit. Pantera was dead. But music never truly left him. In 2003, Vinnie and his brother Dimebag Darrell decided to start over. They formed a new band called Damage Plan, hoping to build a new chapter. Not Pantera 2.0, but a world where they were in full control. No more inner conflict, no more division. The album Newfound Power was released in 2004, carrying with it the effort of rebirth and a surge of fresh energy. They hit the road again. They played again. They tried to smile again. But everyone could see. Something was missing in Vinnie's smile. Despite the effort, he knew that nothing could replace Pantera. And even more so, nothing could replace the brotherhood they once shared on stage. Then, on the night of December 8, 2004, a gunshot tore apart what little he had left. At El Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, as Damage Plan had just taken the stage and begun the intro to Breathing New Life, Nathan Gale, a former Marine suffering from delusions, quietly slipped past the left side speaker stack, approached the stage, pulled a gun, and shot Dimebag Darrell 5 times in the head, right before Vinnie's stunned, lifeless eyes. Dimebag collapsed, his leg twisted beneath him, his guitar still screaming with shrill feedback. Nathan Gale kept shooting, killing 3 others and injuring many more before being shot dead by police. Vinnie was pulled down from the stage just in time. He wasn't injured physically, but part of his soul died right there on that wooden floor. Just minutes after the shooting, Vinnie called Dimebag's girlfriend, Rita Haney, choking back tears. "Dude, I just saw my brother get shot in the back of the head 5 times. Moments later, he called again, managing to say only one thing: "My brother's dead." That night shook the global metal community to its core. But for Vinnie, this wasn't news. It was personal apocalypse. No brother is ever prepared to watch his own flesh and blood fall like that. No drummer is ever ready to go on playing without the one friend who'd stood beside him since childhood. And for Vinnie, music was no longer a purpose. It had become a vessel for ashes. After the funeral, Vinnie shut himself off from the world. He declined all calls, invitations, and sympathy. He disappeared from the music scene, living quietly with his girlfriend Chelsea Yeager, with alcohol and with silence. Some close to him said he drank every day, not to celebrate but to forget. It wasn't until nearly 3 years later that Vinnie would touch the drums again, and not for Dimebag. In 2006, he was invited to join Hellyeah, a supergroup made up of members from Mudvayne and Nothingface. At first, he said no. "I've got nothing left to play for," he told them. But after much convincing, he agreed to try, just once. At the first jam session, Vinnie broke down in tears after finishing the set. Not because the song was great, but because, for the first time since that night in Ohio, he felt like he could breathe again behind the drums. Hellyeah wasn't Pantera. It never tried to be. But for Vinnie, it was survival, a chance to reconnect with something that resembled music, the thing that had once saved him. From then on, he returned to the stage, released albums, and went back on tour, always wearing a pendant that held a portion of Dimebag's ashes. On stage, next to his drum kit, there was always an empty chair, reserved for Dime. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a promise that every beat Vinnie played from that day forward was for both of them. He once said, "Music is the only thing that kept me here. Without it, I wouldn't be." And he stayed. He played. He partied. He laughed. but deep down, he never truly healed. Personal life. On stage, Vinnie Paul was the embodiment of an unstoppable party machine. Long hair, cowboy hat tipped back, a glass of black-tooth grin always in hand, and a grin that seemed 1 second away from shouting, "Let's go." But behind that laugh was a private world no one could quite reach. A place where music, alcohol, and memory wrapped around him like a way of life, and an escape with no return. Though he was once the soul of legendary rock parties, raging until dawn, booze flowing like rivers, music thundering like a storm, Vinnie actually lived a relatively private personal life. He never married. He had no children, not because he feared commitment, but because he had already loved something, or rather, someone, completely, the bond with his brother, Dimebag. People said Vinnie loved the noise, and that was true. But he also needed a quiet corner, where only the crackle of old Pantera tapes remained, and an empty chair beside his drum kit, reserved for the brother he lost. In his later years, Vinnie's partner was Chelsea Yeager, a model nearly 2 decades younger. They didn't marry, didn't seek the spotlight, and never walked red carpets together. But Chelsea understood. She wasn't there to replace Dimebag. She was simply a quiet companion, someone who stayed through sleepless nights, backstage breakdowns, and moments when even the drums couldn't fill the void inside him. Alcohol, especially the Blacktooth Grin cocktail he and Dimebag invented, became a daily ritual. From stage to living room, backstage to his Texas bedroom, Vinnie was rarely seen without a drink in hand. Not to get drunk, but to remember. On some nights, he'd drink alone, replay old Pantera footage, and sit in silence for hours. No tears, no words, just listening, as if someone was still tuning a guitar across the room. He once planned to write a cookbook called Drumming Up an Appetite, blending his favorite recipes with backstage tales filled with smoke, laughter, and liquor. But like many of his plans, it was never finished. Perhaps because he knew if it couldn't be written with Dimebag, it would never feel whole. Friends recalled that although he was always the host of every wild gathering, when the crowd thinned out, Vinnie would often sit by himself. Not sad, but not joyful either. Like a soldier returning from war, carrying in his heart someone the rest of the world could no longer see. In a world where rock teaches rebellion, Vinnie Paul taught loyalty to memory, to the departed, and to the truest parts of himself. Legacy and influence. Vinnie Paul wasn't just a drummer, he was the timekeeper for an entire generation. At the height of Pantera's reign, Vinnie didn't chase the spotlight like Dimebag, nor did he project the same ferocity as Phil Anselmo. But he was the one who held those volatile elements together. A silent, steadfast soldier behind the kit, where every strike was a declaration made without words. From Cowboys from Hell to Vulgar Display of Power, Vinnie's drumming wasn't flashy or overly technical for the sake of showmanship. It was tight, dry, precise, like a gunshot, but pulsing with raw power. He injected groove into thrash, crafting a rhythm that pulled you by the shoulders, not the head, a sound that made Pantera unlike any other metal band of their time. Generations to come would cite him as the launchpad for groove metal. Without Vinnie, there would be no Chris Adler, Lamb of God, no Joey Jordison, Slipknot, and even Lars Ulrich, Metallica, once called Vinnie the true heartbeat of 90s American metal. But Vinnie's legacy wasn't just in the music. It was in his work ethic, creative, meticulous, and fiercely loyal to identity. In the studio, he wasn't just the drummer. He produced, mixed, arranged. Together with Dime, he co-founded Big Vin Records, a label that nurtured independent metal artists, prioritizing honesty and passion over commercial gain. Even after Pantera with Hellyeah, Vinnie never compromised who he was. He didn't shift to please crowds, didn't chase trends, didn't ride on past fame. He played like every note might be his last, and the audience could feel it. When he passed, The silence across the metal world felt like a drumline cut off mid-song. Tribute concerts, shirts printed with Dime and Vinnie, thousands of fan-made videos flooded social media. But his true legacy didn't live there. Vinnie Paul's legacy lives in the millions of young people who picked up drumsticks because of Pantera. In the garage band, drummers still covering Walk, Domination, or I'm Broken every weekend. In the brotherhood of rock musicians who still raise a black-tooth grin to honor two Texans who changed the face of metal without ever asking permission. And above all, his legacy lives in unwavering loyalty to his brother, to his music, and to himself. Because sometimes to become a legend, you don't need to step forward. You just need to hold the beat until everything around you falls apart. Final years. Vinnie Paul never left the stage. Even after the Columbus tragedy, after Dimebag's death, after countless nights drowned in alcohol and memory, he returned. He sat behind the drum kit like a soldier reclaiming his old post, knowing full well his most trusted comrade would never walk out from the wings again. With Hellyeah, he recorded, toured, released albums. He still played drums night after night, steady, heavy, controlled, as if holding back a wild animal caged inside his chest. But his eyes had changed. They no longer burned like during the Cowboys from Hell days. They weren't seeking approval anymore. They seemed to ask only one thing: when will it be enough to finally stop? Hellyeah wasn't fire. It was smoldering ash, a way to survive, a way not to die. But the body couldn't keep up with the will. Age, lifestyle, and the silent weight of years filled with pain began to show their marks. Not loudly, not collapsing on stage, just slowing down. Those around him said that although he still partied, Vinnie went out less and less. He spent his time with Chelsea, rewatching old tapes, living quietly, as if he had never been the beating heart of a Billboard-topping band. He was, in every sense of the word, surviving. And then, one day, his heart couldn't keep up with the drums anymore. On June 22, 2018, Vinnie Paul was found dead in his sleep at his home in Las Vegas. He was 54 years old. No accident, no overdose, no final words. Just another evening like any other. And then, silence. A medical report later confirmed dilated cardiomyopathy combined with severe coronary artery disease, a heart stretched too far, worn too thin, unable to pump blood, just like the man it belonged to, one who had carried too much, held on too long, and no longer had the strength to bear it. The funeral was private, just like the way he'd lived his final years. No massive tribute concert, no grand obituary, just a fresh grave beside Dimebag Darrell's at Moore Memorial Gardens in Arlington, Texas. Two caskets side by side, as if they'd never been apart. Artists from Metallica, Anthrax, Slipknot, Lamb of God, and more offered their condolences. But those who knew Vinnie understood. He didn't need a loud farewell. The most unexpected moment came when Phil Anselmo, the man Vinnie never forgave, appeared via video at the funeral to say his final goodbye after nearly 15 years of silence. He wasn't forgiven. But at least he said what needed to be said. Vinnie Paul didn't pass away like a metal legend. He passed like a man who lived his promise, played his part, and kept perfect time, until his own heart could beat no more. In this world, some drum beats rise and vanish into nothing. And then there are those, though they've stopped, that you never stop hearing in your heart. Vinnie Paul's beat was one of those. Vinnie Paul was never a poster boy hero. He didn't grace fashion magazine covers, didn't make grand declarations, didn't try to turn himself into an icon. But one thing everyone agreed on: he was the foundation. In a chaotic metal world filled with screams and blazing solos, he was the heartbeat that kept everything from falling apart. From Pantera to Hellyeah, from the wild heights of success to the long, lonely road after losing his brother, Vinnie never abandoned music and never abandoned himself. He didn't run, didn't compromise, didn't water down what he believed in just to be loved again. In a world where bands break apart over money, ego, or headlines, the brotherhood between Vinnie and Dimebag stood as a rare reminder of absolute loyalty in music and in life. He lived the way he played drums, powerful, unwavering, precise, and full of heart. And when the final beat rang out, it wasn't the end. It was a message. I've played my part. Now it's your turn. If Vinnie's drums ever made your head bang, ever made you scream into the night, or simply made you feel a little less alone, share this story. Tell us how you feel in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the immortal legends of rock and metal.